so touching, Ziva. I am honored and deeply touched, and I have some tears in my eyes as well. But as Ziva mentioned, this award means everything. It's been a pretty dark time, particularly for those of us at Columbia Psychiatry, and this award has been the shining light for me. As Ziva mentioned, Marian was a really foundational role model for me. This is us in probably the year 2000. And I just need to mention the symmetry in this award too, and that's so deeply touching. So Marian died when she was my age, 62. She was my mentor, and here is my mentee who nominated me for this award shortly after giving birth. So again, the symmetry of it all is really touching to me. On a darker note, these are dire times, obviously, and we know who drove this ship into the iceberg, and so it's scary for all of us. I sincerely hope every single person in this room makes it into one of these lifeboats and things turn around, but I feel like I couldn't start this talk without mentioning this. So I'm obliged to mention my conflicts of interest. They have no bearing on this particular talk. So, last year Sandy Comer gave this, really tour de force talk at her Marian Fischman Award, and I'm feeling a little bit nostalgic and a little bit like this is my valedictory speech in a way, so I'm going to take us on a little bit more of a personal journey and discuss science as well. So I hope you indulge me in that. There will be lots of pictures, and many of you in this room are going to be in those pictures. So just my career trajectory, I started at Rutgers as an undergraduate. I went to graduate school at Tufts, then went to INSERM in Bordeaux to do my postdoctoral research, and then I've been at Columbia since 1994. And I just have to give credit to Rutgers because honestly, I took courses at Rutgers that opened up the world to me. It was, I took neuropsychopharmacology with George Wagner, behavioral pharmacology with John Falk, a real old timer, and the sky opened up. I knew I wanted to study behavior and biology for the rest of my life, and I never stopped. I've had one job since I was 19 years old, and it's been this job. Other than fast food in high school, this is all I've done. So at Rutgers, when I was a sophomore, I started working with the scientist Ronald Gandelman. And we were studying hormones and aggressive behavior. And we were looking at beta-splendins, and they like to have this very dramatic response in the mirror when they think another male intruder's in there. And I had the pleasure of giving them the world's tiniest little injections of testosterone before measuring this behavior. We also looked at resident intruder encounters and the effects of testosterone and aggressive behavior in mice. And so here you see the classic pattern of aggressive and defensive postures. I've probably spent a total of 5 solid years looking at videotapes of animals fighting, so I have this really deep in my blood. So graduated Rutgers, did not want to stop, wanted to keep going, just went straight on to graduate school. I always I had the great privilege of kind of picking my next step based on geography and location. I said to Dr. Gandelman, I'd like to go to Boston next, so he said, I have the perfect guy for you. This is Klaus Mitschek at Tufts, and so there I got my master's and PhD in experimental psychology. And Klaus is really a pioneer, and I don't know if he gets the full recognition for developing this social stress model of social defeat in particular, because it's widely used right now. But Klaus is really known for looking at ethologically relevant models of stress and aggression. Back in the time, people were using electric shock and restraint stress and all these, artificial models of stress and aggression. And Klaus felt like you needed to work within the natural behaviors of the particular species. And so I worked primarily with mice and rats, and we would look at the effects of drugs, typically drugs like morphine, cocaine, or we tested a lot of different drugs, PCP, on both aggressive behavior and on social defeat. So the experience of that animal in that cage who has experienced some aggression. So what we would do is have this brief exposure to this aggressive. When you put an animal into another animal's home cage, there's typically a characteristic aggressive response. And the intruder, it's clearly a stressful time for him or her. So the way we could then model the stress of that encounter without without the animal getting hurt is this shark cage in the home of the aggressive animal. So the intruder is placed in the shark cage. They can no longer get attacked, but he's kind of getting a lot of aggressive displays toward him. So this is really a great chronic stress model. And so I, being a longtime feminist, I have 4 older sisters, came to the lab wanting to study female aggression, because the lore, as many of you know, and still you hear a lot of people say, is we'll get to females later, let's figure everything out in males, and then we can get to females because they're so complicated. So, but female aggression is pretty robust. It's equally robust when a female is lactating. You just take the pups out of the cage and you throw male, female, anything into that cage, and that mother will be pretty fierce, yet equally fierce as any male. And so it offered up the opportunity for us to look at these same kind of models, but in females. Okay, so now for fun pictures. So there's Klaus, his wife Christiana, Elise, Jen Tidy, Elise feeding a squirrel monkey the ice cream cone. And the cohort was Elise, Jen, Jeff Vivian, Jim Winslow. That's the group that we came up with. And unfortunately, Klaus passed away last year, and Elise was asked to write an obituary by Nature Neuroscience. And so his oldest graduate student, still surviving, wrote this together, and it was a really meaningful experience to think back on Klaus and what he did for us. So a graduate school mentor is really like a scientific parent. You come in very enthused, but you really know nothing, and so they have enormous influence in shaping the scientist you're going to become. Klaus had an unwavering commitment to scientific rigor and a deep fascination for science. He taught us to critically evaluate evidence and to work hard. And he had exacting standards. If anybody who knew Klaus knows that. He was not effusive with praise, but when he gave you praise, you were riding high for days. And so that variable ratio schedule maintained very, very high rates of behavior in his students. And so, as I said, he really had a foundational impact. I'd like to take a moment, this is not research I was involved with, but Klaus's first graduate student at Tufts was Jim Winslow, and Jim Winslow was an amazing scientist. He has also passed away, unfortunately. But I wanted to talk about this one study of his, where he was really looking at the mechanism of monogamy in male voles. So there are prairie voles who are monogamous, parental, pair bonding, and they show selective aggression. They're not at all aggressive until they mate. And once they mate and they form that pair bond, they are very aggressive, very territorially aggressive. By contrast, their close cousins, the montane voles, are asocial and sexually promiscuous. They look a lot like them, but they behave very differently. And so Tom Insel and Jim Winslow wanted to figure this out. So there were a few differences in the brain of these animals, but not a lot. And so they did differ in the distribution of forebrain arginine vasopressin, which is implicated in social memory, territorial displays, affiliative behavior. They differ in a few other things, but they honed in on this one. And they did a series of elegant studies showing that the central vasopressin is necessary and sufficient for selective aggression and partner preference formation, monogamy. Well, you can imagine their phones rang off the hook from women's magazines. How can we get vasopressin into my husband's brain to make him monogamous? It was really, of course, over the top. But it was such a cool story. So of course, being sober, serious scientists, they end their paper by saying the extent in which a single peptide subserves social bonding in humans is entirely speculative. So I'm gonna ignore that and just tell a little personal story, and I am going to be highly speculative. So these are my parents. They grew up in northern New Hampshire. They met in kindergarten. They went to the prom together. They got married. They went on to have 6 children. After the war, they had children throughout the entire baby boom generation. This is my husband and I in 10th grade. This is us at our 30th wedding anniversary, and with our 2 children, Jack and Liam, who are right here. This is my son Jack at his prom, and this is him 13 years later. So we are Prairie Voles. Okay, so after Tufts, I moved on to Bordeaux, and to do a postdoctoral fellowship, and I was really more interested in getting at preclinical models of addiction, and I can highly recommend Bordeaux as a place to do a postdoc. It was really fantastic. I have a very thick New Jersey accent in French, but I can get the job done if I need to. And so I brought the social stress model to, they were doing cocaine self-administration studies. I brought the social stress model there and was able to really look at the vulnerability to commence cocaine self-administration in rats repeatedly exposed to aggressive attack, and of course looked at both sexes because that had not been really done. What factors influence drug self-administration in females not yet had not been identified yet. So very pleased Palzati, I think, showed this exact figure at Iskadar, so that it's been 30 years since it was published, so there's some symmetry there as well. And so this figure, kind of hard to see, but the open bars are the animals that had not been socially stressed, and the black bars they had been, and you could see in females, we see a really profound increase in cocaine self-administration, and in males as well. It's a pretty large effect. So that was a really fun study to do. And Prairie Voles coming back. So the Pierre V. Piazza was the senior author on that paper. And this was us in 1995. And so I published with him in 1995, and then almost 30 years later, we went on to publish another paper together, coming back on a totally different topic. But yeah, once you're in my life, you don't get out. So I spent 2 years as a postdoc, and I thought, boy, if we spent one more year there, I'd never leave because it was really growing on me. That's a lovely life in France. So, but I thought I better get out now. And so I turned to Klaus and said, I really want to live in New York next. Who can I go work with there? And he said, well, it so happens I have this good friend from the University of Chicago named Marian Fischman. She's fantastic. However, she studies humans. Not interested in that. However, went to meet with Marian, and of course, once you meet her, liked her so much, instantly connected with her. And so let me just describe Marian in a little bit more detail for those of you who do not know her or did not know her. So she was a preclinical researcher first, like the rest of us, and she really did her initial work on methamphetamine toxicity in rhesus monkeys. And so she highly valued preclinical training in her mentees. As far as I know, she only hired preclinical researchers to move into the human lab because, we all think the human lab is really using kind of many of the same approaches, a lot of control. So she wanted that training for those who moved into the human lab. So back in the 1970s, cocaine was really viewed as very chic. Here it is in a martini glass on Time magazine. The drug advisor for President Jimmy Carter said it was no more dangerous than skiing. So Marian was the first to get a NIDA-funded grant to administer cocaine to humans in a controlled laboratory environment, because she argued you need to understand the factors that maintain the problematic cocaine use by studying its direct behavioral and physiological effects, and studying drug taking, drug self-administration, and seeing what factors influence that. And so you can imagine the fight she had for this, for the ethics of giving cocaine to people in the laboratory. It was a fight, but she used the argument, which I still use on many occasions. Yes, there's a risk to doing something, but there's also a risk to not doing something, and to not study this drug in a carefully controlled way and try to understand it better is unethical. So she succeeded. In 1992, she was recruited to Columbia with Herb Kleber, who was her husband, and he's a renowned addiction psychiatrist. He was a renowned addiction psychiatrist, and they started the Division of Substance Abuse. And they divided it into the clinical angle. So Herb managed the addiction psychiatrists on the team, and Marian managed the PhDs, the human laboratory people. And that model was really, really successful for us because I know nothing about treating patients, but our models it was really translation and reverse translation, because we would look for signals that might be effective in the clinic. We'd find out what worked and didn't work and why, and so we were getting feedback in both directions. It's been a really, really effective model. I can't ignore Richard Fulton. So Marian ran the CERC, which is the Substance Use Research Center. She and Richard were managing the PhDs, and once Marian passed, Richard Fulton took that on. So this is us in the early days. It started off with just Sandy Comer and I really kind of running a lot of these studies, of course with Richard and Marian, but we were the young ones really running the show. Brought on Carl Hart and Amy Ward. It was really a very natural transition. So after studying self-administration in rats, I was able to move and test the effects of medications in cocaine self-administration in humans. And we were able to tell a really fun and interesting story. I really loved the work. So just like in general, the human laboratory model, both for cocaine and what I'll describe for cannabis as well, we use this inpatient setting. These are non-treatment seeking volunteers. We're giving them drugs. They are avowedly not interested in treatment. There's many, many people out there who are like this. They're using drugs. They don't want to change. They don't have any other substance use disorders or major psychiatric diagnoses. Almost all of them smoke cigarettes.